as it's 5 past. So welcome everyone. I'm Emma Wright from the Emma Press, and this is my weekly book chat thing I've been doing since April, every Friday. And this week, for a number of reasons, I decided to have me as the guest rather than one of my authors or a children's literature specialist or translator or illustrator. So instead of anyone else who I normally interview, I put myself in the interview seat, partly because it's the Poetry in Albury Festival at the moment, so it was actually quite hard to get a poet who would read tonight, and I didn't want to clash with a kind of a poetry thing, but seeing as the kind of second UK lockdown has just started, I thought this would be a perverse time to take a week off. And also I have been, I haven't really done an interview for a while. I haven't done any events for a while either. So I thought maybe there were some questions that people wanted to ask. And seeing as I'm still in Riga, so those of you who've been tuning in most weeks, you'll know I was meant to go back a couple of weeks ago. Partly due to Jutta. Jutta's been saying don't go for a while. She thinks it would be better for me to stay in Latvia. I decided to stay on for just a bit longer, just for November, to take the edge off being on my own back in Birmingham. So I stayed a little bit longer. My boyfriend's flat. And yeah, I'm still able to see people in a limited way in Latvia, which is very nice. And yeah, so I've asked my friend Jutta to interview me today, but I'll introduce you to Jutta first before we start the interview thing. I met Jutta in 2016 when I first came to Riga for a publisher's visit. So at the time, Latvia was preparing to be a market focus country for the London Book Fair as the Baltic countries in 2018. So they were preparing by kind of creating more relationships with publishers and journalists and festivals. So they still do this, but with different parts of the world now. But back in 2016, the focus was on the UK because of the London Book Fair. So that was my first international business trip, which was a really big deal for me because I'd hoped I would one day have an international business trip. And that's when I first met Jutta and lots of other people who I still know to this day. And Jutta is the program coordinator at Latvian Literature, and she does, and currently, or maybe has just come off maternity, has just finished covering the maternity cover of Inga, who runs it. But her main thing is organising translator workshops. And what are the other main things you do, Jutta?
Well, so basically my position is grant program coordinator. So I'm running the grant program for foreign publishers and translators, and also the translator program manager. So all activities connected with our translators, and of course also the publisher visits that you already mentioned.
Yes, I formed it was very flattering to be asked, and it was very exciting. And also at the time I was looking to branch out into translations anyway, so it was a good visit. And yeah, since then become friends. And yes, so I thought who better to ask me some questions. And also whenever we meet up, Jutta is always asking me about my business. So I thought
why not do it on record?
Yes, exactly. We'd only have to do it at the weekend anyway. So yeah. And before I start, just had a question from the audience. Just, is it possible to see the audience? So sadly not, because this is the webinar format. You'll only be able to see us. And if people want to say hello in the comments or ask questions, you can do that to all panelists and attendees, and then you can see each other, so maybe have more of a sense of who else is here. But I can tell you there are 11 of you watching right now. So you are a very special and cherished audience. To be fair, this is the normal number I get. So I'm very happy with this. And it's nice to see my aunts and my dad in this number as well.
Oh, hi.
And Lydia says, glad you can't see me as I'm in my pajamas. That is the bonus. On the one hand, you can't see everyone, so you don't get that kind of collegiate feel. On the other hand, you can really show up in anything, and yeah, no one can possibly see. And hello, Simon and Ayrshire, who is delighted to be tuning in tonight. And hello from Toronto, Elizabeth. So the format of this evening is Jutta's going to start by asking me some questions questions. I sent her some quite bland ones, which I felt, just to give examples of what questions I felt like I could answer, and then Agneta may ask some of her own, equally may not. And then we had some submitted in advance from one Lydia. So thank you for this very committed audienceship. And also you're very welcome to ask questions, and I do encourage you to, because, well, Yutta's very worried that there'll be there'll be no questions and she'll have to dig deep to the more personal ones. So if you do have questions, then please do put them in the Q&A box. So if you're watching from a computer, I think on the phone as well, there'll be a button that'll be quite obvious saying Q&A. But if you're watching on your computer, you can hover at the bottom and click on Q&A and type your question in, and Jutta will field them and ask them to me, and I'll probably glance at them too. And yeah, so I'm in the hot seat, and you're all very welcome to ask me anything about the Emma Press or publishing, or probably books in general. Yeah, maybe don't ask me if I've been reading much poetry recently. I've just been rereading favourite children's books for comfort, so that's not a good question to ask. But apart from that, anything you'd like. So I'm going to hand over to Jutta now.
Thank you, Emma, and hello again to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. So, yes, looking forward to receiving your questions in the Q&A section, and please don't write your questions in the chat room because I might miss them. But I also wanted to begin with how I met Emma. So, as you know, I met Emma in the year 2016 when she came to Riga for a publisher visit that we organized. And I remember that my first memory about Emma is that she is the perfect person to host at such an event. And I noticed that during a dinner where we had allocated seats, and Emma engaged with everyone who was in close proximity to her. So she was talking to the person on her right, she was talking to the person on her left, she was talking to the person who was sitting across the table from her, and that was me. And she was also talking to the people on my right and my left. So, you know, and as an organizer, this is what you really want from your guests, for them to be interested and for them to engage. So I liked Emma from the very beginning. And at the same time, during this visit, we all thought, well, we had this feeling that Emma maybe had a bit of a mysterious vibe, because during the whole visit, we weren't quite sure if she was interested in anything in particular. You know, any specific Latvian author or Latvian illustrator or Latvian book. So she was kind and, you know, positive about almost anything and everything, but we didn't get the feeling if something has really spoke to her in a way that she would actually publish it. So you can imagine our surprise when on the day that she left Riga, she sent me and my colleagues a really long email detailing all the future plans that she sees with Latvian literature. And, you know, we've been working together ever since, and we couldn't be happier. So I would like to start today actually with two questions. So first question is, what are the qualities that you are looking for in a literary work for it to be an Emma Press book, both original work or a translation? And second, how did you come to start publishing translations?
Okay, so yeah, I was wondering if you might ask that, about what makes an Emma Press book. And I think it's a mixture of things. So one has to be that I personally do really like it. So I think that's important. That's kind of the implicit kind of promise of the name, the Emma Press. It's something that I personally respond to and I think is exciting or interesting. So it has to kind of tickle me in some way. But then also, I've also got to think it's important as well. So in some way, not in a way that's necessarily kind of world changing, but I've got to feel that there's a reason that this book should be published. And I guess so there's some sort of reason of why now. It doesn't have to be necessarily about anything that's kind of timely, though that's also nice, but there's something that kind of, I guess there's some sort of emotion about it. There's some sort of feeling. So it does get, this is probably the wishy-washiest I get, where it's a feeling in my heart, and then it's a general kind of vibe that I think this is good. And well, this isn't one of Lydia's questions that they sent in advance, but it was one about, would you publish something that you wouldn't personally pick up off a bookshelf? And it's a really good question. It's a really hard one as well, because there are lots of manuscripts and lots of books in translation where I've read the samples of lots of things that I've read where I think they're really good books. So I think, yes, solid, great book, definitely could be published, but I just don't want to. And then it comes down to, do I have a personal reaction to it? But then at the same time, I've published over 90 books now. Obviously, every single one can't be my kind of absolute kind of love of loves. And so for those, I don't know, so then sometimes it's more the importance, and sometimes it's more the kind of personal excitement, and it's just got to be a balance of the two, but there's got to be both there in some way. So that's my very long answer. Is that diplomatic? I was trying to think. Maybe I should say every single book is my absolute favorite. And I do think they're all great. I think every book I've published is great, and I think there is always a reason. And actually, for a lot of the poetry books, it would be kind of like 4 words in something that would have made me want to publish it, or at least made me want to see more. So it's kind of could be that smaller thing. And then how did I come to publish translations? I think that was something, well, it wasn't so much that I wanted to publish translations, it's that I wanted to publish interesting, excellent books. So I think probably eventually I would have come around to it, but we have a mutual friend called Lawrence Schimmel, who I did a book chat with a while ago, and so you can see it on the Facebook page. And he's a translator, but also a poet and a publisher. And so he's one of the first poets I published in the mildly erotic anthology. And he's been telling me to publish translations since 2013 when I first met him. So there has been this kind of ongoing thing. And I think I probably would have come around to it anyway, because I'm by no means resistant to translations. Like my dad's a translator as well from Mandarin. So I have that I'm kind of technically bilingual with Hubei, a dialect of Mandarin, but I'm not very good. So there's kind of languages backgrounds, and I did classics at university with Latin and ancient Greek. So I wasn't necessarily intimidated by it, but I think there had to be a reason, because the intimidating thing about translations is just the contracts and having to deal with this side of things. And whereas if you're a very small publisher publishing manuscripts you receive, there's limited amount of paperwork, whereas with translations, there's also the grants applications. So there's a lot of stuff you suddenly have to deal with, 10 forms instead of 1 form. And the impetus for me to tackle that paperwork was wanting to publish more diverse children's poetry. So I felt like the poetry for children being published in the UK was a little bit limited, and it was quite small. And I was interested to see what other countries were publishing for children. So that came from a place of curiosity, and then Lawrence had already sent me a couple of manuscripts, which I did end up publishing. So the first one he sent me was Poems the Wind Blew In, which just got highly commended in the Clipper, and Super Guppy, which came out last year by Edward van der Vendel, translated by David Colmer. So I had those in the back burner. And then I was through Lawrence again. I think he recommended me for the visits. So I came to Latvia and then there weren't that many poetry books. I probably should have. I'm surprised that you saw me as a mystery, because I'm pretty sure I came along thinking children's poetry books. So maybe I should have told someone, but in my head I knew what I was looking for. And I saw this amazing poetry book published by Peter Garlis called The Noisy Classrooms, Schola Klasa, And that was perfect. And that was kind of exactly what I was looking for, where I think quite a lot of poetry in the UK, well, back then, I think it's changed a bit now even, but it was quite kind of constantly kind of jokey, or like just maybe on one level. And I was really interested in the Noisy Classroom being pitched at a more introverted child who's maybe who feels quite lonely, even though they're surrounded by other kids in the classroom. And yeah, the author Yeva Samalska is really good at capturing kind of the quieter moments. So that was the first one. And then also I wasn't planning to look for short stories for adults, but then the Latvian literature agents pitched me one, and that was The Secret Box by Daina Tabuna. And Daina is actually doing a book chat in a couple of weeks, so I really recommend that one. She's a really great reader, and her stories are excellent. So I read those and I thought, yes, this is perfect. And I just started doing my prose pamphlets at the time. So The Secret Box ended up being the third prose pamphlet I published back in 2017. So that, I guess that was a good start of that relationship. And yeah, so it grew. Yeah, so yeah, those are my 2 months.
Wonderful. So we actually met you at the very right moment in your career.
Yeah. It was all about timing. It was just I happened to be at that moment, I guess, partly looking for a challenge as well. And so I'm always, whenever I feel like I've got to grips with one thing, then I'll add in another thing. So I started it, well, the first book was in 2013, poetry for adults. And then in 2015, I added in poetry for children. And then 2016, prose pamphlets, and 2017, translations. So it just happened that was when I was open to adding in an extra complicated thing to figure out.
Wonderful. So we now have some questions from the audience. So what is the best thing that has happened to you in 2020 so far?
Oh, I mean, it's hard to say in a way, because obviously it's been a weird and terrible year in lots of ways, but also kind of really nice things have happened. So I'm going to keep it to kind of publishing things, but one thing that made me really happy was getting 2 books on the Clipper shortlists. So Clipper is, I think, the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education's Poetry Book Award, so Poetry for Children Book Award, and so there's not many. Well, poetry for children is quite a small area, and there are not many areas where they're recognised. So there aren't really any other awards. There are some kind of competitions in magazines where you can be recognised as a poet, but for a publisher of poetry. And then also there are prizes for children's books, but often the judging criteria is stuff like, is there a good narrative? How are the main characters? So it's really skewed towards novels. So it's quite hard to get poetry and then kind of recognised in those awards as well. So the Clipper is a really big deal, especially if you primarily, like me, publish poetry for pamphlets, which are small, like poetry pamphlets, and then poetry for children. And there's 5 on the shortlist, and I got 2 out of 5, and I was just so happy because there's lots of discussion all the time about prize culture and whether it matters really. But the Clipper is really good because they do loads of publicity, and they do have the ears of teachers. And what I found from having 2 books previously shortlisted, so one in 2016 and then one Moon Juice by Kate Wakeling, one in 2017, they just do sell quite steadily. So they just, I guess because teachers just kind of overwhelmed, they don't have time to kind of go out and find things. So when there are just some poetry books identified, they think, okay, that's the poetry. And so you just could instantly get that focus. So I was like, 2 books, maybe there'll be 2 books that I might sell steadily at last. That would be great. And then also as well, just because of the particular 2 books that got shortlisted. So one was a translation, which I think is the first full translation to be shortlisted. That's Poems the Wind Blew In by Carmelo Sierra-Barron, translated from Spanish by Lauren Schimmel. And then the other one was a collection of poems for teens called Wayne, which is LGBT reimaginings of Scottish folk tales. So that was a really, that was a really kind of important, brilliant book as well. And to have those kind of 2 things, translations and LGBT, kind of on the shortlist was really, really exciting. And so I just, I don't know if any of you watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but there's a bit where Captain Holt is like, vindication! So, that's how I felt. Yeah, so that was
wonderful.
Thank you for that question.
So 2020, not a crappy year, not a completely crappy year for Emma.
No.
Okay, so the next question. Looking ahead to 2021, do you think the COVID pandemic will influence what you are looking for in the books and poetry you publish?
Oh, that one. Oh yeah, this one. I think this is from my aunts. Another aunt. So I think I might have two aunts on this watching. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Emma's aunts.
That's a difficult one. So I think a lot of people have been feeling, I don't know, it's definitely kind of focused me even more. So, you know, not that I was kind of coasting before, but maybe sometimes I'm a little, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm moving in quite a sleepy way. And I think just this year and just thinking kind of, I guess like a lot of people, like all the kind of the main things that were making my life nice were kind of, or just kind of, yeah, they were kind of removed. And or I mean, I'm very lucky to be in that at the moment, but kind of initially all those things. So I guess I thought, yes, I want to maybe feel more in control of what I'm publishing and when. And I know that sounds weird because it's just me running the Emma Press on my own, but I think I sometimes feel a little bit swayed. So kind of what kind of want, like, obviously everyone wants to be published, and I think the main way that affects me is I sometimes publish things because I publish too many things. Not that I wouldn't publish them anyway, but people tend to want things published as soon as possible, so that just often results in us having quite a cramped publishing schedule. And I think the way that things have slowed down in 2020 well, for me, it's been quite helpful because I was just overwhelmed to begin with. So when I think of what 2020 was looking like for me back in March, it was going to become 2 to 3 books a month, which really would have been way too much. And I can't believe that was what I was intending to do back then. So I think it took me a few weeks to process it, but then I started pushing things forward and just kind of spreading it out. And now I think actually, so I think, what's Sarah's original question? How would it influence it? So maybe not the things I'm publishing, but it's just the pace at which I publish them. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Okay, so how do you set about making your illustrations for the pamphlets?
So that's a really nice one, actually, because in the past, again, I'm going to spend this whole thing saying about nice things about 2020, which maybe I haven't had the mood in the room. But I've been enjoying things a lot more. I've been enjoying processes a lot more than I have done, because in the past I've just been quite stressed because there's too many books. So this year especially, I've really enjoyed working on the illustrations for the books, whether it's been myself doing them or another illustrator. So when I illustrate the books myself, I tend to ask the poet if they had any strong feelings. So like sometimes people just aren't very visual, so they'll have nothing, or they'll have a hunch. So for example, there's one poet in the audience, actually Rachel Spence, whose pamphlet I published in March. And Rachel said in her form, there's this kind of questionnaire form for authors, she said she was really into kind of grids and lattices. And I really loved that idea, partly because Rachel's pamphlet, Call and Response, is a sequence of sonnets about mother-daughter relationship, about kind of maybe a slightly strained relationship, and then the mother gets ill, and then the daughter's looking after her, and how it develops. So, and it's not told as kind of linearly as that in a way, but it tracks that developing relationship and at this interesting, kind of painful but kind of weirdly healing stage. And because there's so much human in the poems, I was already thinking I would find it hard to draw figures in it. And then when Rachel said about the grids, I thought, I love this because it kind of sounds like it might be a little bit easy to draw a grid. But B, I think that's going to work better with the poems because I don't want to kind of draw attention away or somehow pin them down. I think the whole thing about a poem is that it's kind of alive and moving, so you want to kind of complement that. And obviously it wasn't as easy as that. So I did my due diligence and I looked at all of the links Rachel sent me of all the artists, like with the minimalist lines, and I was thinking about it. And I think I've had lots of compliments actually, so I feel really good about it, and Rachel was really pleased with them, so thank you, Rachel. So what I did was I was trying to be very, very mindful when I was doing them. So I kind of did all the ruling outs, and I was in kind of a very kind of calm state, and I was thinking about the poems a lot while I was doing these lines. And so I hope that came through. I'm not that kind of confident about minimalism. I don't think I quite understand it, but I did really enjoy doing them, and I do like looking at the pages. So that was an example of how one of the illustrations came about. And then, yes, then some of the other ones like Menagerie with Cheryl Pearson, and that's the poetry pamphlet that was illustrated by Amy Evans. And that was in the Art Square series. So it's kind of a nice square book. And the idea is that it's a bit like a picture book for adults. So I wanted it to be very, very lush, but also I wanted to use this local printer, partly because I was afraid of printers shutting. So it was meant to come out in May. So I've been in contact with this printer called the Holodeck for a while, and he does really nice risograph things, with kind of, it's a bit like photocopying, but nicer, and it has a nice texture. So the main brief I gave to Amy was kind of integrate some of the animals featured in the poems into 4 kind of dense patterny squares, and they had to be 2 colors. So she chose kind of a pink and I think it was technically red and green, but with the shades. So I just kind of give a vague brief, and then they send pencil sketches, and then I kind of say, that looks great, carry on, or I say, oh, I'm not sure about this, how about this? So hopefully that gives you an overview.
Okay, which book was the most creatively fulfilling to put together, illustrate?
Put together and illustrate, you think?
Yeah, together or illustrate. Which book was the most creatively fulfilling?
I guess all the books I've done this year have been kind of at the top of my mind. Maybe I would say most of them are. Some books have been a struggle, but most of them overall are in the end. But I'll pick out one. There's one, Elastic Glue by Kathy Pimlott. It was this pamphlet that came out at the beginning of last year. And I think that was the first book that I properly tried to edit myself. So before then, I always had someone else who was a poet, who was kind of either just doing the editing and involving me a bit, or kind of at least there to kind of check in with. So I was always I was only doing kind of 30 to 40% of the editing of that, and I always had this kind of safety net. And then last year I was starting to edit on my own. So that was kind of, it was weird because I thought no one else is going to really understand why I'm kind of nervous, because I've obviously technically been doing this for ages. But for me, it felt kind of alarming, and I was worried that even though probably I should at that point have known how to edit, it was still scary. And I kind of went through, and then as I was doing it, kind of I was annotating the printouts and writing down my thoughts, and I think, thinking which poems didn't quite fit. So all the things I'd kind of learned through working with Rachel Pearson. She was the main one who used to hold my hand. So I felt like I'd learned those things, and I was finally kind of blossoming into an editor in my own right. And then since then, I've edited a lot of books on my own. And I'm each time I'm growing in confidence, and that it feels like a strange thing, because it's like obviously I would be only learning about rights contracts in 2017 and all of these things, but editing kind of 7 years after I started is an odd one. But that felt like a little victory to me, to think, oh, okay, I did it all the way through. The poet was happy. I think the book came out well, and it got good reviews as well. Not that it really matters, but it was more that the poet wasn't like, what are you doing? I thought the Emma Press was meant to be professional.
Okay, the books you publish all look and feel very beautiful, lovingly designed. How important to you is physical product?
So it's very important to me, and I do think about it quite a lot though, because I started out before I started the Emma Press, I was working in Orion, which is this big publisher of kind of novels and blockbusters in London, and I was working in the ebooks department, and it was in 2010, 2011, around the time when ebooks were kind of taking off and people were a bit worried about whether they were going to kill the printed book. So in that time, I had a lot of time to think, what's the point of the printed book, surely? And surely it's got to be something really nice to justify, because you could just have an ebook. And I think now people have calmed down a bit. They don't think the ebook's going to go anywhere. It's fine, but it's not going to kill the printed book. So it's no longer such a hot topic. But I think that informed my ideas of what I wanted to do when I started. So I thought I want books that are accessible. So I tried to make ebooks myself. That was probably a foolish thing because it takes kind of a long time to make the ebooks as well. So that's why some of my books are still not ebooks yet, but I am working on that. Now I'm just outsourcing it because it's quicker. But I wanted the printed books to kind of justify being printed books. So I thought, well, why would I just put it on paper for the sake of it? It's still a book if it's an ebook. That's important. But I want it to be something that's nice, and especially because I was producing quite short books at the start, partly because they were easier to manage the whole thing nicely. So I thought, well, I'm going to curate every part of it, and I want them to feel nice in the hand. And so I guess partly I wanted them to feel like proper books. So maybe it was partly just wanting to seem legitimate at the beginning. But also I have lots of books from my childhood, which I really treasured and kind of went back to a lot. And they were just lovely things. And I really like seeing people with battered Emma Press books, because I think, well, that's good because it still looks nice. It just looks a bit worn. So that I got sent some pictures of Kate Wakeling doing a reading to, like an online reading to a school last week, and I shared it on social media. But I could see her copy of her book Moon Juice is like it's obviously 3 years old and she's used it a lot, and I really like that because I thought that's hopefully a good quality thing, still looks nice even when it's kind of bent and scuffed and kind of things that's folded down. And I guess also I want my books to feel like gifts. So whether that's a gift to yourself or to someone else. But yeah, the reason it's kind of a thing that I think about quite a lot is early on, some people I was talking to were saying, why are you spending so much money on the paper? It's the writing that's important, and you're really spending too much money on the paper. And which I think was a totally valid point, because that's the thing, is there's no point in having the most beautiful book in the world if you're then broke. So I do think about that sometimes. So I'd say some of my books, I think I've done kind of the most beautiful job on, and some of them I think, well, I still think it's really nice. I think the cover is nice. Sometimes there's an extra, a bit of coloured paper, or the illness anthology recently, I kind of did a design inside the cover, so it was still nice. And then sometimes they're illustrated as well. So I think even if I know in my heart of hearts I could have paid 3 times as much to have them printed, I think, no, that was good. It doesn't really matter. So sometimes, yes, and sometimes I splash out and I really regret it. I think, why did I do that? I've not sold any. So like if I paid an extra £200 to have a shiny bit on a book and then I sell 50 copies, I feel really silly. So that I just kind of, it's a constant question of like, how nice should I make them? Should I aim to make the most beautiful book in the world? And yeah, I think overall it's better to keep going. So yeah, beautiful but not the most beautiful is my answer.
Okay, so do you have a favorite medium for your illustrations?
So I guess I'll answer for mine and then I'll answer for other people. So for my illustrations, actually, again, it all comes back to Riga. So there were a lot of things that happened there, but one of them that really stayed with me is that I got invited on this illustrator's breakfast. So it was the last day, and all the other publishers and me, we went to this cafe, and in the back room, Ruta Breda, who's a lecturer at the Art Academy of Latvia, she'd organised, well, there was a breakfast, there was some kind of snacks and things, but also there were activities. So we all had to draw on a little card. We had to draw our idea of breakfast, and then we got shown some animated clips from the illustrators. And I think just over the course of that, I suddenly felt really empowered with my own illustrations. So, because that was 2016, so I'd been kind of drawing for 3 years, and I kept trying to draw in a way that would mean that no one could notice that I hadn't been trained and I hadn't really been drawing that much. So I felt quite insecure, and I was always trying to draw right. And then just through this presentation, and Ruta is a really powerful personality as well, so she was just really, really encouraging. And it just made me think, actually, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I can just draw anything. I can make my style anything. And so after that, Emma Press historians might notice. So after that, I started drawing in a much kind of swooshier, kind of inky way. So the first one I did that on was the Anthology of Sea, which was, I mean, there was a review, which I still remember, which said these illustrations bear no kind of relation to what the poems are, which I felt was very unfair, because they really did. But like one of the poems was about an but it was about an oil spill. And I looked up that particular famous oil spill, and so I did draw it, but it was stuff like that. But I did definitely draw everything in the poem, but it was much more free. So I just sort of watered down some ink and used a paintbrush, and I wasn't trying to make it absolutely look like, I don't know, a photograph of this oil spill. I was just trying to make it kind of look nice, but also just, I don't know, reflect something I felt. So I'm very into painting with ink, and I think that feels less daunting than kind of a dip pen, which is the other thing I mainly use for illustrations, just because just a line and a line and a line, and sometimes it feels like that it already goes wrong after a few lines, whereas with painting with ink, sometimes, you know, I know there's only so much you can paint with the, like, there's only so many lines I can do, or so many swishes I can do, because otherwise the page will just be black, and then it'll cover up the text on the other side. So there's only so much I can put on. So there's just those kind of considerations, which means that it's quite liberating, because I think, well, I don't know, a little bit and then I'm done. And then maybe I'll go back in with a bit of pen just to pick out details, perhaps. But I'm still experimenting with that. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay, so the next question. I think call and response is an object of beauty. I'm so glad you take so much trouble. Could you name one or two of your favorite writers, poets or otherwise?
Well, I will say, so this is the book you can see kind of splayed in the background. I've been rereading these books by Hilary Mackay, who's a children's author, and I think she's so good. I used to read her books when I was younger, so she had this series called The Exiles, which I remember reading when I was maybe 11 or 12. So there are about 4 sisters, and there's 3 books in that series. And then when I was maybe 15 or 16, there was this new series, started with Safi's Angel, and then it's again following some siblings. And then when I was on this kind of librarian networking events last year, I guess Uncorrected Proof of the Skylark's War, which is a really wonderful book. So that's why I'm rereading now. I kind of sat around kind of following the journey of a young girl kind of growing up from maybe like I guess the Edwardian times, and then with the First World War starting, and that's a really interesting perspective. And then her newest book is I think The Time of Green Magic, which is again about siblings, but from a blended family, but with a magical element, which she hasn't done before. But her writing is so good. It's really simple, but you can look at 2 sentences and like, this is brilliant. It's hilarious. It'll make you cry. So it's I'm really, and she's on Twitter. I haven't tweeted her yet. It's really strange just thinking she's on Twitter, and I don't think she doesn't have that many followers, so maybe she would see if I tweeted at her. But yeah, so that's the author I'm reading into at the moment.
Okay, I have a feeling that we will have to finish our talk soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can we maybe finish with a question about your plans for the future?
Yes, I can definitely tell you about those. I mean, where to start? All the things. So I've been doing so much planning for the future because at the start of this year, well, kind of, this is why I didn't say this in answer to the first question about the best thing that had happened. So I found out just before Christmas that I'd got some Arts Council funding as part of the Elevate programme for diverse-led organisations to build organisational resilience. So I had all these plans, and then a lot of them were to do with having face-to-face meetings, and then the pandemic happened, so I had to just kind of think, well, what does becoming resilient look like now? And I mean, some of it is broadly the same. So I meant to hire someone. That's meant to be my next step. And I just need to figure out how you hire someone. So the last few weeks, I've been doing I haven't done non-stop courses, but I've been doing so much reading and emailing to try and find out kind of how you properly recruit. And I did an HR for beginners course the last on Monday and Tuesday this week, and I've been kind of getting advice on how you kind of write a proper job description. So it'll be an e-commerce executive is the thing I'll be recruiting for, and probably like any week now, as soon as I've kind of finished kind of following all of these very important steps for good practice recruitment, as soon as I've written all these things, then I'll advertise it. So the imminent future is hopefully kind of having my first employee, which is quite scary.
So exciting.
But yes, very exciting, because people keep saying to me, imagine what it would be like to have someone kind of helping you do the sales and not have to, helping with my web shop sales. So once that's in place, I think it'll be very different. And then hopefully next year, then I'd recruit this is part-time as well, like a publishing assistant. That's the moment. This is kind of this nebulous thing. So originally, all the plans have been moved around a bit. But at the moment, I think I need some publishing assistants. But what does that even mean? So I'm trying to figure that out. So the next steps are all about growing the team rather than growing the amount of books I'm publishing. And then next year it will be mostly 1 book a month, occasionally 2 if my arm is really, really twisted, but mostly just 1. And then seeing how it goes with having a better website. My website's being made better at the moment, so that will hopefully be unveiled in the next few weeks. So kind of lots of really exciting things, but quite overwhelming, because I was doing this accounting course and all these things. But I think I did a social media post about it, just like, I'm really taking care of business. I'm trying so hard to learn all the things about business, and hopefully that means that I will do it in the right way and it will be good. But yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
So yes, this is the ending, but I promised Jutta I'll do the outro, so it wouldn't be a terrifying ending. So thank you to everyone for watching and for asking your lovely questions, and thank you so much to Jutta for agreeing to ask them to me and being my very lovely host and moderator. I hope you all had a nice time, and I hope you had all your questions answered. And maybe I'll do another one of these next year when many more changes have happened, because that would be nice. Thank you again for watching. Next week there is a poet, Emma Simon, who wrote Dragonish, which came out in 2018, maybe 17, and she's really great. It's kind of very funny wry poems. She's got a great one about witch trials and Daily Mail. Hopefully she'll read that. And then the week after, it's Dinah Tabuna, who's a really fantastic prose writer, and she'll be reading some of her short stories. So you'll get an email tomorrow with the links. So I hope some of you will come to those. So every Friday, probably just till Christmas. I think the last one will be the 18th of December. And then, I'll probably start again in January, because I like doing these. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Tirsa. I will see you tomorrow and see everyone else hopefully in the future. Okay, bye.
Bye.